a tavern. It was just a private home, but people had punch bowls for different sizes. If they had two people over, there was a tiny punch bowl. If there was a party of 20, they had a bigger punch bowl. So punch was basically the drink of the colonies in the 18th century. Starting even before that, in the 17th century, there's quite a bit consumed. And a lot of the notables had it. George Washington, Lafayette were known to have had specifically the punch that we're talking about today, which is the fish house punch. Picked this one to pair with Ben Franklin. Franklin does not refer to the fish house punch. Franklin referred a lot to drunkenness and to inebriation. He has a very famous glossary of, can't remember how many terms it is, something like 125 or more terms that are synonyms for the word to be drunk, including obscure things like been to Barbados was one of them that always sticks in mind. You'd say if somebody been to Barbados, it just meant he was falling down drunk, because Barbados was where so much of the rum had come from. Lots of great terms in there. He was aware of it. He enjoyed a good glass of wine. As I said, I don't know if there's been a direct connection with him with fish house punch, but I'd be surprised if he didn't have it. It's named after it was a gentleman's club, basically, downriver of Philadelphia. It's called the Colony of Schuylkill Fishing Club. It created its own world. They had, instead of having a president and vice president, they had a governor and a secretary of state. After 1782 and independence, they changed the name to the State and Schuylkill was the name of their fishing club. It's founded in 1732, so it's been around for quite a while. The members would meet every other Wednesday between May and October. For over 200 years, they managed to keep this up. They always had a roster of 25 members, or what they called citizens, and then 5 apprentices. And they didn't have any servants or workers there. Everyone was expected to do all their own work at this fishing club, and making the punch, cooking the meals. There was Marquis de Lafayette. When he came through in 1825, he was recruited to cook steaks on the fire. And apparently Chester Arthur, the only sitting president who visited the club, came in 1882, and he was recruited to shell peas. But the one drink that they always made, it was considered top secret for quite a while, was this fish house punch, which we have the recipe for. It is a sort of a traditional punch, but it has a couple of extra elements in it. It was made with peach brandy, which is sort of the key one that gave it its real flavor, but also a mix of cognac and aged rum, plus tea, plus the lemon juice. So you've got all your major ingredients in there for a punch. And but the peach brandy really made it sing. And unfortunately, peach brandy is really hard to find now. Peaches were converted into brandy in the colonial era and right up through into the 19th century, because peaches were wonderful. They grew well, they grew abundantly all throughout the South, but they were hard to transport to market. As anyone knows, peaches tend to ripen pretty quickly when they're good, when you pluck them off the tree, when they're just before they're ready to eat, but it's hard to get them to market, especially before there were trains, before there was automobiles to get things to market. So what you do is take your peaches, mash them up in a barrel, ferment them, and then distill them and create peach brandy. And it was really the brandy of choice throughout the colonial seaboard in the 18th century. It was, you can find the pricing guides. You can get French cognac for a certain amount of price. You get American-made brandy. And then there was peach brandy, which aged peach brandy often went for a premium. Of course, peaches now are valuable as they are. They can be sent to market. They can be refrigerated. There's all sorts of ways to sell them at full value. So it's not that much made into peach brandy. There are a couple places. One in Virginia, Catoctin Creek, makes a peach brandy, and one in South Carolina, Highwire Distilling, makes a peach brandy. If you can't find that, you can sort of fake a peach brandy, which I've done. You get a peach liqueur, which is basically peach flavored liqueur, usually naturally flavored. Some of them are very good. Get a European one if you can find it. It's like Mathilde is very nice. I mix 1 part of peach liqueur with 3 parts of apple brandy, 1 part of vodka. And then the key thing that I figured out, because I was reading some accounts of making peach brandy in the 1800s, and they would mash the peach pits in with the flesh. And the peach pits have that sort of almond marzipan flavor to them, which I think gives it a sort of a nice little note of bitterness. So I am making up this thing. I'll add a few drops of or a few dashes of almond extract in there to make it. So you can fake a peach brandy. And then the punch, as I said, is basically 1 ounce cognac, 1 ounce rum. Well, we've got a video for that if we want to run that one.
Yep, we will. And so, yeah, for a couple people have just joined. So if you're just joining, especially on YouTube and not at NCSS, you're like, what is going on? And so again, we are doing a virtual happy hour with Wayne Curtis, a cocktail expert and a contributor to The Atlantic, among others. He can go through that list again a little bit later. But yeah, we're talking about cocktails with HistoryMaker VR, our VR content creation tool. And our first drink of the stream is the Fish House Punch, and we are going to run that. Let's see. So once we get that rolling, there we go. Of course, we had a tech run through and everything went smoothly. And now it's just taking a little bit more time. So we have, like I said before, we have 5 drinks. The first one is going to be the Fish House Punch that Wayne just talked about. And the video will play. But before or as the technology continues to figure out what it wants to do, what are some of the other drinks of that time that we either I guess on both things that we might have known of or that has disappeared from our time?
There were a number of unique drinks in the 18th century. That probably after punch, one of the second most popular and common ones was called flip, which dates to the late 1600s. Some early accounts of that, and that was a hot drink. It was enjoyed in the winter in the northern colonies primarily, and it was a mix of rum and beer, usually a darker beer. This was pre-ale. I mean, it was ale. It was pre-lager. And then there was also a sweetener in there, which is often molasses or sometimes dried pumpkin, whatever they could find that had some sweetness to it, or sugar if they could afford it. But it was all mixed into a pewter pitcher. And then the key element was a piece of red hot iron called the loggerhead. So you'd heat the loggerhead up in a fireplace in a tavern until it was red hot, and then stick it into the drink, which would cause it to bubble and hiss and foam up. It would caramelize the sugars in the sweetener, and it would toast the grains in the beer. So it created a really nice flavor to it. The loggerhead was originally a tool used for shipbuilders. They would use it, keep it hot, and stir their little barrels of pitch when they were caulking seams in ships to keep it pliable and soft. And somehow it made its way into a tavern. There'd be a couple loggerheads leaning up against the fireplace. People start arguing about politics or whatever. They get into fights. They pick up the loggerheads and start wailing at each other. It was probably not a pretty sight.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's where we get the phrase "at loggerheads" comes from. That's the only thing left of flip that I can think is the phrase. A couple of people arguing that you say they're at loggerheads, and that dates back to the 1800s, and no one's quite sure. I think a lot of people assume it has something to do with turtles. Who knows? But that was where it came from. So that was a popular drink. There were lots of others. Have you figured the video out yet, or is that?
Yeah, so what's going on is, so for our YouTube viewers, again, we're using Zoom to go through YouTube, and my Zoom application is deciding that it doesn't feel like responding. So that's why on YouTube I freezed for a little bit, but I was still here.
Can hear you, but you are frozen.
Oh, nice. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so Yeah, again, this is fantastic. So yeah, so I guess what we will do, let's continue, uh, and we'll get to the Fish House Punch video whenever my computer decides it feels like that it wants to work.
Your system decides it's ready for it.
Exactly. So let's move on to the second drink that you're. Oh wait, hold on. I think we're okay now. I think it decides that it wants to work. Let's see. Am I still frozen?
Still frozen on Zoom,
Nice.
but it's a good angle.
Yeah, yeah. No, I see it. I see it on YouTube. It could be worse. um,
Very serious for someone talking about cocktails.
yeah, that's right. Okay, so yeah, it is going to take its time. So it's, yeah, so all this is good. So let's move on to the Abigail Adams, the drink of her time, and that's the. I always struggle. I haven't heard anybody like name. It's Madeira, right? The Madeira cobbler. Am I saying?
Madeira, potato.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can use either of those. It's yeah, that's the drink I paired with Abigail Adams. It's the Madeira cobbler, and we were talking about classes of drink that existed back in this era. We talked about punch, we talked about flip. The cobbler was another one that came up. It was don't confuse it with a fruit cobbler that you bake with a biscuit on top of something. It was a whole class of an early drink, very closely related to the julep. And it was tied in with the popularity of ice. So it was a somewhat later drink where it took off. Its roots go back earlier into the 18th century, but in the early 19th century is when it really took off. And again, that was because of ice. Ice was suddenly very popular all up and down the eastern seaboard, in the West Indies, pretty much anywhere a ship could dock. There was, as early as 1807, as I recall, in New Orleans, there was a man named Captain Scott who advertised, quote, good clean ice for sale on his boat when he came to New Orleans. He'd come down from New England and brought ice with him. And his ad said that you needed to come before 9 or after 5 to avoid the heat of the day, and to bring your own blanket to bring the ice back. Shortly after that, there was a man named Frederick Tudor from Boston who became the ice king. In the late 1810s, 1820s, he took off. He started figuring things out. Figured out that you could cut ice out of ponds in Boston, outside of Boston, up in Maine, load them into ice houses, which were built along the shore, and they were, thick planks filled with sawdust in between. The ice blocks were cut out, maybe 2 foot by 3 foot, slid up sluices into the ice houses, then packed with sawdust. And they could stay all summer in there. They wouldn't melt. And so the ships would come up, collect the ice. The special ships, Tudor had special ships made, which were double hulled with sawdust in between the planking. And he could ship his ice all around the world. He shipped it as far as India, which is sort of amazing. Oh, wow. They would, it might be a several month voyage to get there, but the ice would be fresh and intact by the time when they got to India. So one account where they found that, I think it was, I can't remember the exact number of days, but it was something like 7 or 8 days it took for the ship, even after they'd emptied the ice out in India to the ice houses there. It took 7 or 8 days for the hull to reach ambient, temperature. They were so well insulated. But so it wasn't that big a deal to get ice down to Charleston, Baltimore, and New Orleans. New Orleans at one point had 14 ice houses. You get a subscription for ice so that you would just pay a monthly fee, and you'd go down and collect ice every week in your blanket or your bag and bring it home. And that made it started, the 1830s was really the peak of the ice trade. Lots of ice being hauled around the world and sold different places. And it also followed, there's a mania for ice cream at the time, because suddenly people could use hand crank ice cream makers to make ice cream. And then in the drink side, it really set the stage for this mania for cobblers and for juleps, which was just taking ice and you crush it. and then you pack it into an ice. So pack it into a metal cup, preferably, or you could use a glass or even ceramic. But you run it really fine like snow. And that was what was sort of the amazing thing about it, was you could go into a tavern or a hotel bar in New Orleans where maybe it was 95 degrees and humid outside, order a julep or a cobbler, and the bartender would slide you over this basically a big mound of ice with lots of bourbon, or in the case of the sherry or the Madeira cobbler, a wine that had been sweetened with some sugar. It was, according to Harry Johnson, this in 1888, who wrote a popular bar guide. And it's been around for quite a while at that point. But that he said that in 1888 it was the most popular drink for both ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, wow.
It was really popular. People just liked the ice. So the basics of it, or the DNA, was sort of the same across cobblers, whether it was a sherry, a port, or a Madeira cobbler. You would add wine. You pack the ice into the glass, and if we can get the video up, I'll show how that's done. And then add some sugar with the wine, then pour that all in. But then the key thing was fruit. It was really like a fruit cocktail. Whatever fruit was in season would be adorned on it, whether it was strawberries or raspberries or blackberries. Pineapple was popular. And it made for a really refreshing drink. And if you can imagine what it would be like to be in a starchy, high-collared outfit back in New Orleans in 1880s, and to be able to sit down and have a drink that was just full of ice, it would have been sort of a remarkable
Yeah.
thing. So I don't know if that video is.
No, it's just my Zoom in general. So let me see if I can. Sometimes if I can just turn my video off and back on. No, it's just not responding. Oh, this is so frustrating.
You tried the share screen? Would that feed into Zoom, to YouTube?
Yeah, the issue is here. So thank you, folks, for bearing with us. It's that my Zoom overall is just refusing to respond, which is not ideal for a live meeting. No. So yeah, so we have.
Do you want me to try to share my screen? And
if you have the videos up, yeah, let's go for it. Let's try that.
Here, let me see what I can do here. We'll try with the Fish House Punch.
Yep.
And let me know if this is working. I will share screen. You've got to permit me to share. I think got to click on.
Let's see if that'll let me. Let's see.
It's the Zoom life. It's 2020. What would it be if we weren't trying to figure something out on Zoom?
I know, right? Okay, so let's see if I can. Okay, so if I make you a host, it just make me co-host.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Let's see if I can do this now. Shut this down. This. And can you see that?
Yep.
Let's run the Fish House Punch video then. Nope, not that. Can you hear it okay? Ingredient cocktails. We'll start out with a.
Yep, that's good.
Ounce of cognac. Add a ounce of aged rum. Use a 20 boat here. Use anything that's got a little bit of
Oh, I can't hear you, Wayne.
Okay, that was the Fish House Punch. I think we'll do the Madeira Cobbler. Should we do that one now and then move on?
Yep. Yeah, let's just roll.
Let's get that one up. And screen share. Here we go. Again. Okay, Madeira Cobbler. For that, we're starting out with 2.5 ounces of Madeira wine.
I don't see it yet. But if you, maybe that's fine.
Shaker. Put in 1/2 ounce of heavy body rum, a Demerara rum, or anything that you've got that's got depth to it, just to give it a little bit of body. And a little bit of sugar. Got some simple syrup. Put in maybe a teaspoon of sugar. Now comes the fruit flavoring, which we want a lemon peel, a couple of orange peels, put them right in there. And then you take your berries, whatever berries you've got or happen to be handy. Blackberries are good. Blueberries a little small. Raspberries are what I got here. Put half of those in. I start with about 10 berries, put about half in there. Take it, add some ice. You're shaking. Do good sized cubes. And then you give it about a peel, put your nose out, eat up the berries, get some of that flavor from that. And then you want to prepare your cup. For this, you're going to use crushed ice. This traditional way. This is popular back in the early days when they could get ice from ponds that generally shipped down from New England to the other parts of the colonial seaboard. I make the crushed ice by just taking regular ice cubes. I've got a canvas bag. It's a mint bag used for U.S. coins. You pick these up eBay for pretty cheap. And a large mallet. Put the ice cubes in here and just pat it, and you get this nice powdered ice coming out of here. Fill up your chilled cup with that. Add your strain out. Berries are coming through, nice. Get all the liquid out of there. Stir it up a bit to make sure it's distributed. The ice is loosened up, and then so much of the cobbler, just like the mint julep, is based on sort of appearances and making it look great. So take some more ice, pile that up on top, get that nice smelly wrap to it. Then you decorate it up with the remaining berries. Get a nice sprig of mint, loosen it up so it releases some of the oils. It smells good. And then, of course, how do you drink that? You need a straw, because otherwise, no. So you put that in there. A straw just about that height above there, so when you reach down there to sip, you get the smell of the mint, smell of the berries, and the taste of the drink. Cheers. Okay, there are the first two drinks. Now move on to the next, which is the apple brandy old fashioned. So this one I paired with Abe Lincoln for a couple of reasons. One, he's from the Midwest, grew up in Kentucky, represented Illinois, big apple country out there. Thanks largely to Johnny Appleseed, who managed to make his way through there in advance of Lincoln, plant lots of trees. Apples were just about everywhere. Lincoln had a real fondness for apples, probably because he grew up surrounded by them. Even when he was in the White House, he enjoyed eating them at lunch with nuts, cheese, and crackers, and apples were generally considered one of his favorite foods. Also, before he studied law, this is a little less well known, he owned a shop in Salem, Illinois, co-owned it with a guy named Mr. Barry. and they had a license to sell liquor by the glass there. And according to records, that was in March of 1833 that he got the license. And it cost them $7 to buy the license, and they sold half pints of French brandy for 25 cents, peach brandy for 18 3/4 cents, and apple brandy for 12 cents. So with apple brandy old fashioned, you've really got a collision between two different trends. One is the apple brandy, and the other is the old fashioned cocktail. Apple brandy predates the old fashioned, but they were more or less wed in the 19th century and stayed that way for a while. Apples, of course, as I said, grew everywhere. They were planted widely. They could be eaten. They could be stored in a barrel in a basement, and they could be crushed and made into cider. And then the cider could be miraculously converted into something alcoholic by just leaving it out. The yeast and the air would get into it, and it would ferment it up to maybe 4, 5, 6% alcohol, sort of like a beer. So hard cider was popular, and then the more enterprising people could manipulate it to bring the alcoholic strength up even higher. Commonly, if you were in a farm in the north, you'd make applejack. You'd take your hard cider, like I said, maybe 5% alcohol in it. You'd leave it out to freeze, and when it got cold, down below 15, 10 degrees in the wintertime, and then you go out at night and you take a large spoon and you just scrape off the ice and throw it away. Because water freezes before ice. And so if you take the water out, water freezes before alcohol, you would take the ice out and it would increase the alcohol content of the liquor. You do that 2 or 3 nights in a row and you might be able to get it up to 20, 30% alcohol. So that was sort of the classic Applejack. If you were even more enterprising and wanted to spend some money, you could have a still, a copper still built, keep it in your barn, take the apple cider, put it through there, and you produce some lovely apple brandy that come out the other side. If you really care about it, you put it into a barrel and let it sit for a year or two, so it would develop some more interesting flavors. You pick up some of the oak, the vanilla and the sweetness of the oak, as well as just it would oxidize, so it would develop a richer, deeper flavor. It was hugely popular. Apple brandy was really popular at the time, available everywhere. The oldest licensed distillery in the U.S. is Laird's Apple Brandy. It's in New Garden, Virginia. It is a wonderful brandy. It's been around since the 18th century. They've managed to keep their licensing going. When I visited the distillery in 2018, I'm looking at my notes and it said all tarnish, no polish. It's still very much run down. But they make a great apple brandy. I really enjoy that. They have 2 variations. There's the bonded, which is 100 proof, and the standard, which is 80 proof. Get the bonded if you see it. I think it's got a lot more backbone and spine to it. It does really well in an old fashioned. But you can still find now apple brandy has been coming back in the last decade. Baltimore Spirits, which makes Sagamore brand out of.
Okay. Yeah. I've had Sagamore.
Yeah, they do a really nice apple brandy. They do one. It's a Pachuga style, which is a tequila or mezcal tradition where they would hang a chicken in the still and get some flavor from that. But they do it with a Maryland ham. They make a brandy with Pachuga style with Maryland ham. Wright and Brown in Oakland, California is a new distillery that's making a beautiful apple brandy using pink pearl and Gravenstein apples.
Oh, cool.
And then in Texas, there's Alpengold Distillery, Copper and Kings in Louisville. In New York State, there's Harvest Spirits, which all make an apple brandy. So it shouldn't be hard finding an apple brandy. The old fashioned is really the classic, it's the foundational drink of America. Back when cocktail was first defined, it was 1803, it was mentioned in print. 1806, it was defined in print as basically being a bittered sling, and a sling was just alcohol with sugar. If you added bitters to it, you had a bittered sling, which then was referred to as a cocktail. And no one's quite sure where the name cocktail comes from. There's lots of theories. We won't go down that rabbit hole right now.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah.
It was a popular drink. It was just called a whiskey cocktail. So you'd have whiskey, sugar, and bitters, all up into the late 19th century when these young these young hipster bartenders with the big mustaches and their aprons started adding things like vermouth into drinks. So they would create a whiskey drink with vermouth, which of course was the Manhattan. They'd do a gin drink with vermouth, which became the martini. These drinks were all established in the 1880s, 1890s. And some of the old timers would come into a bar and say, I don't want any of these newfangled drinks. Why would you be mixing wine with liquor? Just give me one of those old fashioned whiskey cocktails. And it's sort of the name stuck from there.
Okay.
That's
cool.
It's a collision of two. So you can make an old fashioned out of any spirit you want.
Yeah. See, I started my love of bourbon with old fashioned, but then I kind of liked the sweetness of the vermouth, but then I fell into rye, like rye whiskeys, and with rye whiskeys mostly being used with Manhattans, that I kind of just shifted from old fashions to Manhattans. And it's just been the past maybe past year and a half that I discovered Applejack, like, because Laird's is carried very well in Pennsylvania, and I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully looks like my video is finally back. Like, I had to leave the meeting briefly to come back, so thank you, Wayne, for carrying all of this. But the apple brandy, or the apple old fashioned, is in Abraham Lincoln's days. And so yeah, Wayne, if you want to continue with sharing the video, I think that works.
Okay.
If you can't, just to be safe.
Here we go. Let me connect us back in here. Share screen. Open this up. And here we go. And back. Okay. Apple brandy old fashioned. Apple brandy, simple syrup, Angostura bitters. One of the simplest drinks. So start out 2 ounces of apple brandy. I'm using Copper and Kings. That's from Louisville, Kentucky. You can use a Calvados, anything you prefer. Any sort of Laird's apple brandy, very good. So you start with 2 ounces of that. Just wants a little bit of sugar in here to give it a little bit of sweetness. It's a classic drink. Between 1/4 to 1/2 ounce, depending on what you're sort of inclining towards as far as sweetness goes. And then the Angostura bitters, it gives us a nice, robust, maybe 2 or 3, 4 dashes if you want. Add ice. Chill. Give it 15-20 seconds, let it chill down. Strain into a single rocks glass. And traditionally with a old fashioned, a little bit of orange peel to give it some of that orange zestiness. Squeeze it in, let the oils get on the surface, wipe some of the oils around, drop the peel in. Cheers. Okay, that's the simple drink. That's the easy one, but you can keep experimenting with it, try different kinds of sugar, different kinds of sweeteners. You can even try it with maple syrup or with the Demerara sugar, see what you like best. So that one. We'll go on to the next cocktail, is the Mark Twain cocktail. I paired, this was a relatively easy one because Mark Twain wrote a letter to his wife, Olivia. He was in London in January of 1874, and he wrote back, Livy, my darling, I want you to be sure and remember to have in the bathroom, when I arrive, a bottle of scotch, a lemon, some crushed sugar, and a bottle of Angostura bitters. Ever since I've been in London, I've taken a wine glass, what is called a cocktail, made with those ingredients, before breakfast, before dinner, and just before going to bed. So Mark Twain knew what was up. Cocktail, very briefly, one of the theories about cocktail is that it was a morning drink. You would get up in the morning and make yourself a cocktail as sort of a medicinal thing. And so it was the tail of the cock. The sound of a rooster crowing is what the drink was related to. That's one theory about it. So Mark Twain here is giving some credibility to that by reporting that he would have one every morning before breakfast. So it's the Mark Twain cocktail is basically a whiskey sour, but made with scotch. The sour was sort of a foundational cocktail between the 1860s to the 1960s. the whiskey sour, of course, quite popular, and particularly in the 1950s and 60s. And it's sort of along the whole way, there's just been a tug of war between sweet and sour on that, where it falls on the spectrum. So you just find it what sits well for you when you make this. Yeah, it's in some ways it's a punch that's designed to be made in a single glass because it's got the citrus, it's got the sugar, it's got the spirit, and then you sort of water it down with a little bit of ice. But it's a stronger drink, and the bitters comes in as a little bit of an extra twist. A fancier way to do it is something called the New York sour that came in later in the century, towards the 1890s, which involved just put a float of red wine on top of it, which gives it a really nice look. And I think they liked if you pour it on gently or on the back of a spoon, just to let it pool up on top of the glass, it has this nice deep ruby red color that might slowly drift down into the glass. So a lot of it was aesthetic, but it also had a pretty nice taste to it. So let's do the Mark Twain cocktail movie.
Yeah, let's go for it. And I'm going to make myself one as Wayne gets his video ready.
And here we go.
Okay, the Mark Twain cocktail. This calls for a blended scotch. I don't happen to have blended scotch. I have a single malt here at hand, so I'm using that. Just a little bit of it's a waste of a single malt. She's sipping a single malt. 1.5 ounces of blended scotch. Then you also want 3/4 ounce of lemon juice. That'll be almost a full lemon, not quite. And then 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. And then a couple of dashes of Angostura bitters. And your ice. Use also a rocks glass. Pour it in. No ice, just serve it up. A lemon twist. Right in there. And cheers.
Wayne, I can hear you shaking your cocktail there.
That's right.
Making me thirsty. One thing I've learned from doing these videos, I probably should not try to talk while I'm shaking because it's fairly loud, but hopefully all the information got across there. So that's the Mark Twain cocktail. Now we'll roll into the final cocktail, which is the 20th century cocktail. And this one I paired with Harriet Tubman. And this is a little hard to find a direct connection with Harriet Tubman, but I think that in this case, I was inspired by a segment that Rachel Maddow did on MSNBC, saluting Harriet Tubman, and she paired her with a 20th century cocktail. So I'll give her credit for that. And largely it was built around the number 20. Harriet Tubman, of course, a famous actor in the Underground Railroad, an activist for freeing slaves. It was decided that she would be on the $20 bill, replacing Andrew Jackson, who was, well, as Rachel Maddow points out, would never have wanted to be on the $20 bill because he was opposed to paper money from the get-go. So she, as Maddow phrases it, Tubman is freeing Jackson from his imprisonment on the $20 bill. It was supposed to be this year that it was supposed to roll out, the year 2020, which would be very poetic, the $20 bill being read.
And one of the one good things in 2020, right?
It would have been one of the good things, but the Trump administration backburnered it. They slow walked it, announced it wouldn't come out until 2030 because of something involving anti-forging technology they thought needed to be developed, which didn't make sense to me. But they have their reasons, so they postponed it for another decade, and it's so it won't be out this year. But Harriet Tubman will eventually be out. It's also poetic in that in 1899, Harriet Tubman, she was a widow of a Civil War veteran, and she was getting a $8 a month pension from the federal government at the time. And in 1899, her pension was raised by an act of Congress to $20 a month. So it's also appropriate that she be on the $20 bill. And she lived until 1913, which was into the 20th century. So this drink is sort of dates to about I'd say probably roughly the time of her death in the early part of the 20th century. It shares in common with a couple other drinks, the sidecar and the aviation, in their names, and the fact that they were named after modes of transportation. People were pretty excited about the changes that were happening at the time, and there, one of the more famous train routes was the passenger train that ran between New York City and Chicago, starting in 1902, and it went for 65 years. It was extremely opulent. It actually went faster than the Amtrak route between New York and Chicago today. It takes several hours longer than the 20th Century Limited. It was sort of a technological marvel. Had a really opulent dining car, and it could really transform travel into something pretty extraordinary. So that was really what it was named after, the 20th century cocktail. But we're in this case going to pair it up with Harriet Tubman, and we'll let me jump over to that movie, that video. We'll see how that's made, and then we can come back and talk a little bit more and see if there are any questions and wrap some things up.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, here we go. And now.
Okay, the 20th century cocktail. That is the gin-based cocktail. I'm using Benham's gin. Most any gin will do. I would skew more towards a London dry gin style rather than an American style, which tend to be a little bit more floral and can get confused with some of the classic mixed drinks. Start out with 1.5 ounces of gin. You want 3/4 of an ounce of lemon. Normally I would have my squeezer, but it's not right here. So you can do it without. It's basically about a lemon would be anywhere between 3/4 and a full ounce of lemon juice. That goes in. About 1/2 ounce of creme de cacao, which is a sort of chocolate-based liqueur. It comes in both sort of dark and clear versions. I skew towards the clear. Certainly for this cocktail, the brown version sort of tends to muddy things out. And then you want the Lillet Blanc, the fortified wine, similar to a vermouth, a little lighter tasting. We'll see. Oh, nice and citrusy. Good. Add all those into your shaker. Ice goes in. Up. Garnish it with a little bit of lemon twist. Cheers.
Okay. That's the 20th century cocktail, which is what I'm having myself right now, which is a very tasty cocktail. It's very simple but elegant. So that takes us up to the 20th century, and it takes us right up to the cusp of 1919, which should all have a moment of silence for that. That was when Prohibition was passed, and in January 1920, liquor was illegal in the U.S. That lasted for 13 misbegotten years up until 1933, when repeal came along. In fact, is today December 5th? It is. Today is repeal day. today's the day that the prohibition was rolled back, and that the it was FDR made the first legal martini in the United States. Well, in theory, probably not true, but yeah. So today's a perfectly appropriate day to be celebrating the return of liquor. And then from 1933 to the present, cocktails have risen and fallen. It's sort of one of the truisms in like architectural criticism is that people, I think it was Robert Venturi, the architect, referred to it as the grandmother's wedding dress principle, that people hate the pictures of their mom's wedding dresses, but they love their grandmothers, and it just sort of repeats itself generation to generation. I think that's can be said for pretty much anything that involves trends, which is like cocktails. And I think young kids coming up, turning 21, being introduced to various forms of drinkable recreation, embrace one thing one generation, and then their kids reject it. So there was a great boom in cocktails in the 1930s, and then in the 1950s, and then things sort of fell apart in the 60s and 70s. People discovered something you could smoke rather than drink, and then there was sort of a diversion into light stuff. I mean, vodka did not exist prior to World War I and World War II in any meaningful measure. It took off after World War II. Everyone wanted things that were really light. It was the Wonder Bread era. It was the things where people didn't want flavor. They wanted simplicity and cleanliness. And vodka took off. Then in the 70s, you had light beer, you had white wine spritzers, and then in the 80s, it was the dark ages of cocktails when you had things like the Harvey Wallbanger and things that were basically just sweet. Basically, you could put anything in a glass and then add some Galliano and consider it a cocktail, which was the definition of the 80s.
So we do have a couple questions. We do.
Okay, let's jump on those. We got a few more minutes.
Yeah. So again, thank you, folks, for hanging out with us through my technical difficulties, and thankfully Wayne was able to carry the burden for today. So thank you, Wayne, for all of your stuff. So Cindy Gaston, she's part of the NCSS conference out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I spent some time in Chattanooga. I love that city. So thank you for joining us. And she is asking you, Wayne, can you describe how the 20th century drink tastes? Because she said it sounds yummy.
I don't think it has to be described beyond yummy. It's got the thing about any cocktail is to be well balanced. Everything, too dominant. And in this case, I think you've got everything in there. You taste a little bit of the gin. The gin's a little bit recessive. You got the tartness from the lemon. You've got the fruitiness of the Lillet Blanc, which is nice. And then you definitely get the elements of the creme de cacao, the chocolate notes, but they seem to come on the finish. It's nothing is too forward in these portions. It's just well balanced, and it comes together like, I guess maybe closest I could compare it to in other senses is sort of a chocolate truffle, but a very subtle one.
Yeah, because I remember I was telling you I had to make a liquor run to make the Mark Twain cocktail, and I actually searched for the Lillet Blanc, and I couldn't find it. Like, is that popular like in places in the U.S. or?
It's had a resurgence with the cocktail revolution of the last 10 to 15 years. The Lillet has come back pretty strong, so you should be able to find it. I know I'm in New Orleans. It's pretty available down here, but then again, everything's pretty available down here. So it might take a phone call or two, or
Okay.
go to Drizzly, which has a delivery service that's in most states now. And they probably direct you to the store where it's found. So it's out there. It's good. It's tasty. And as I mentioned, that you could sometimes you just want to pour a little bit on the rocks with a twist of lemon in it. It's delicious.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, that brings us up to pretty much our time. So again, if you missed some of this, this will be on our YouTube channel. So feel free to take a look again for NCSS members for the first couple of weeks while this is available. Only you have the PDF of all of the drinks on our in our booth in the exhibit hall. So just go to SG Live at NCSS, and you're able to download the PDF with all the ingredients, all the drinks, and that are categorized according to the character that it's associated with at HistoryMaker VR. And again, if you're interested in learning more about HistoryMaker for our NCSS participants, visit our exhibit booth. For those on YouTube, please go to our site, historymakervr.com. Look up Wayne Curtis and his brilliant TEDx Grand Rapids talk about the craft or the rise of craft cocktails, and it'll get you energized even more about the cool cocktails that we are seeing in our century, and just to experience the past as well of what came before those. So Wayne, where else can people find you?
WayneCurtis.com is my webpage, and yeah, here's the book and a bottle of rum, which is available everywhere pretty much. So yeah, you can track me down. Yeah, WayneCurtis.com. There's a form for email. If you have any questions, shoot them my way. I'm happy to answer them.
Cool. So thank you, Wayne, for spending an hour of your time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon. Yeah, for Schell Games, our next dinner with the devs, just talking about games, is December 16th. So if you are able to drop by and talk about HistoryMaker and everything else, we'd be happy to see you. So take care. All right.
I'm still here.